let's see, this panel is the representation of people of color in comics. Are comics doing as much as they could to represent the non-white characters? And our panel hosts today, Deb is going to be your panel host. I'm pinch hitting. This is Terry Sears. And our other panelists are Jeff Carroll. Wave and say hi, Jeff.
Hello there, virtual world.
And Richard Byers.
Hi, everybody.
And Juan San Miguel, who has not yet joined us, but I'm sure he will be here momentarily. So, seeing as be on mute. So first of all, I'm going to mute everybody because the panels usually start out with just letting the panelists talk. Hang on. Okay. So and then we'll get into questions from everybody else a bit later. So let me go unmute the panel people. 1 second. Do that. Come on. And then I click the button and then it goes no. All right, Jeff, are you trying to unmute yourself? Because I keep hitting the unmute button and it won't unmute you. Oh, I see that Juan has joined us.
All right, I'm unmuted now.
Okay. And there we go. Juan, stop hitting your button. Okay. Oh, God bless America. Come on. Work. Work. All right. All right. We got. All right. So we should have Richard, Juan, and Jeff are all off mute. And then I will unmute Deb when she gets back. And one more thing. Let me set this up to. Okay, now that nobody else can unmute themselves for the moment. And I don't know if one of you guys had a place you wanted to start, seeing as I wasn't planning on doing this. I don't have any questions other than.
We need to introduce ourselves briefly.
Oh yeah, sorry. All right, so we can do that. Jeff, you want to start off and just introduce yourself and tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Okay, my name is Jeff Carroll. I am a sci-fi and horror writer. I do film, I do comic book, and I do novel. I live here in South Florida, and I used to call what I write hip-hop horror, but now I call it black sci-fi, black speculative fiction, science fiction, whatever fits, all of that stuff. And I'm a multi-year alumni of Necro, so it's good to see everybody's doing well. I know we all remember each other, so it's good to see everybody, same faces, healthy during the quarantine.
Awesome. Okay, Richard.
Hi, I'm Richard Lee Byers. I'm a fantasy and horror writer. I've been reading comic books, mainly DC and Marvel, throughout my life pretty much. I've written one graphic novel. I've written prose fiction based on the Marvel Universe. Most recently, a book called Marvel Legends of Asgard, The Head of Mimir, which will be out on October 6th.
Cool. And Juan.
Hi, I'm Juan San Miguel, a longtime fan, attended over 30 World Cons. I've tried to book myself on the subject. One of the things I just put out in the chat is an article about pre-code comics that we can talk about by Saladin Ahmed, where there was a little bit more freedom before the 1950s in dealing with comics based on women and marginalized characters.
Okay. Now, so I guess you can start off by, who wants to answer the question first on whether you think that the comics these days are doing a good job of representing non-white people?
Do we think they do? Is that what the question is?
Yep.
It depends. I was just double checking. I mean, there's more of it. There are more marginalized characters in comics. This year's Hugo winner for Best Graphic Story, LaGuardia, was written by Dr. Nindi Okorafor and focuses on a character with Nigerian roots and dealing with the issues of today of immigration and intolerance towards immigration. A lot of the other comics also featured similar characters that were nominated, and depending on which books you read on, I mean, I'm reading stuff where there's a lot more representation than I think there was like 20 or 30 years ago.
Well, if you look at the big two, DC and Marvel, which like I said is mainly what I am familiar with. I mean, and you take the long view, like from pre-World War II all the way up to now. Obviously, there's progress. Whether there's enough progress that things are up to an appropriate level of representation, I would say no.
Okay.
You just randomly answer because I want to answer that question too.
Say that again? Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, cool. I think there is more visual representation, but in terms of the content representation, I think there needs to be more organic content representation as opposed to kind of what we see is reimagining and re-envisioning characters of color that were created by people who are not people of color. So I think there is a esoteric need that has been met, the visuals, but in terms of the writing of it and the vision behind the characters, most of what we've seen is reimagined characters and stories. And I think it needs to be more organic from creators of diverse backgrounds.
Okay, cool. Well, did any, like I said, I wasn't prepared to try to pinch hit here. So
I'm right across the hall from Debbie. I'm gonna go see if she's gonna join us or not.
okay.
Oh, Anne is in Deb's spot.
Oh, Deb's coming. All right, you see Deb talking to Ann.
I thought I was right across the hall.
No, Deb. Okay, minor technical difficulties as we try some stuff. Right. Hang on.
Right here. She's right
How
here.
are you going to moderate this panel?
She is.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry about that, guys. We had to swap around a room, and it's not as easy as it sounds sometimes. So anyway, has everybody done introductions, or shall we start there?
Yep, we did the introductions and we answered one question, but carry on.
Yeah, take it away, Debbie.
Hang on a minute.
Can I just add on to a little bit of what I said? And maybe that'll give you a chance to get yourself together, Deb.
Okay.
You may want to do it with headphones.
No, that's okay.
Yeah,
I can always watch it on YouTube.
I'll say yes, Jeff, go ahead.
Okay, so introductions. Done introductions?
Jeff wanted to add to the comment.
Okay, let me start with introductions then.
No, we already did that.
Introductions.
Deb, we already did that.
Okay, all right, you've already done that. Good, we're off.
Yeah,
and running.
Jeff wants to add on to what he was just saying.
Okay. Anyway, the panel is, and I'm going to read what we
No,
got.
we know
here.
that. Just let Jeff finish what he was saying a minute ago. That's
Okay, sorry.
Kind of what I was saying, I do a little presentation called Black Dreams Matter, right? And it talks about how there's such a beautiful variation of thoughts, just like there is a variation of cultures. And we are only on the tip of the iceberg when it comes to those things. When you look at, say, what was done with Black Panther, if we're going to use that as like the poster story or character example for what we're talking about here, in terms of it delving more into the cultures that are in Africa, dealing with the clothing, dealing with the music, kind of everything except for the food. I think that really helps the diversity of it, but in also the imagination. I think there's excellent jobs being done by Watchmen and and what we see in now Lovecraft Country, but that's not really a comic book. But I think is a little different when a person of color may do it per se, and then not a cherry-picked person of color. Somebody out of the community of other creators from that community would probably write it different than somebody who is not from their culture, but of their culture and writing about that particular culture. If you can understand, I say, an Italian American who's never been to Italy would write a different story than an Italian from Italy. I hope you understand it that way.
Hey, Jeff, I'm just curious. Did you read the book that Lovecraft Country is based on?
No, and I'm dying to read it. I'm not a fan of Lovecraft. As much as I've attended Necronomicon, I love the dead. And he writes about them being zombies. So I'm not that big of a fan of the mythology of it, but I'm intrigued because I'm watching this Lovecraft Country and it's all over the place. I'm trying to figure it out. But it's very interesting to see how they may have adapted the screenplay from the book and the source material. And I know they go crazy and they don't always adhere to source material, but I love studying that variation. I love to see
Lovecraft Country was it was like several short novellas made into a novel. So they're like 6 stories in that book. And the thing is, I don't think that the gentleman who wrote it was a person of color, and it's being adapted by a production team where the leaders are persons of color. So I was just kind of curious if you saw anything with that. So that's why
I read the book, and I'm now watching the show. And what I would say in both cases is that the title Lovecraft Country is much more to do with what the book and the show are trying to do thematically than actually trying to depict Lovecraft's mythology.
Okay.
Particularly the show. There is very little of Lovecraft's actual mythology in there, but the whole show it can be seen as a response to Lovecraft's racism, which runs through his fiction.
Well, it's weird you say about the mythology because there's a bunch of shoggoths in the first episode. That's the only one I've seen so far.
Well, they aren't actually properly represented according to the mythology. And I'm not sure they're even called shoggoths. And the further along the show goes, the more it gets away from anything that Lovecraft ever wrote.
Because I was wondering, it seems very culturally aware of the times, especially for somebody like me. I didn't know all those things that I can't imagine Lovecraft himself writing about a sundown town. That just seems like too sensitive for him to see it from that particular perspective. I would see him
there's nothing Lovecraft
get out of that
like
town.
that.
Okay, yeah, and Juan, yes, I do think of it being as a reimagined character by the screenplay and the director of color, and that's why I referenced Black Panther, because as much as Ryan Coogler did to Black Panther, him being called Black Panther, him being a Black Panther character is imagined from a person who wasn't of color. And so giving them Wakanda, giving him all these other elements that are more Africanized, that came from Christopher Priester and some other Christopher Priest and other people along the way,
Anisi Coates.
Yeah, well, I don't know. Coates, I don't see Coates' influence in the movie Wakanda. I see it all over the comic book, but I don't see it in the movie Black Panther. That Black Panther came from Christopher Priest. And even Jonathan Mayberry may have had an influence in the movie, and then Reginald Hudlin, who did a run of Black Panther. But Coates, his run was concurrent. So I don't think they took anything from what Coates was bringing, because Coates had a whole different image, especially of the Dora Milaje. He had a different image of what Wakanda was. So it was different for his run.
Well, in fairness, I think that, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby did create Wakanda. And the idea that Wakanda is both traditionally African in certain respects, but also incredibly scientifically advanced in other respects, is right there in the comics that they wrote. So I think that they get some credit.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. I think the groundwork is definitely laid by them, and then you can go through blogs to find out some of the things that they added and subtracted along the way to get to where the movie was that we saw. So yeah, no doubt, I definitely give them that foundation. But in terms of a organically created Black character, I don't know if it would have become Black Panther. I don't know if it would have become a world that was more advanced than the regular world that we live in. One of the things that Black writers always critique white writers writing about Black characters is this magical Negro. This overly super powered whatever he is. He's extra smart. He's John Coffey. In the Green Mile. He can't just be a regular person. He's got to be extra stronger than everybody else. And I think in some regards, that's what Wakanda represents. I mean, I like it, but yeah, he's just that. He can't be a regular Iron Man. He can't be a regular Batman. He's got to be extra bigger than everybody else.
Well, again, I kind of think that's the superhero genre in general, though, isn't it?
Yeah, but even among superheroes, there's no place. Wakanda isn't a superhero. Wakanda is a place.
Okay.
Uh-oh, Deb, you gotta take yourself off mute.
Sorry. Yeah, my mistake. I was going to say, so you're saying instead of the character himself being overdone, it was actually Wakanda that was overdone in this case to make it bigger, better, faster, etc. Not just the character, but the whole ground, the whole country.
The whole element, all of what is Black Panther.
Oh, okay. So everything combined to
from
to do that.
from the vibranium, but that's concurrent with what Africa represents when you think of even the other character that is similar to Black Panther, and that is Lion Man. When you look at Lion Man, and I don't know if you all are familiar with that, but that was another character by All Negro Comics. And in Lion Man, he was going to protect Africa from uranium extract, and they were going to make atomic bombs from it. So it was still some mineral that Africa had that was so valuable. So that's fine, but it's still like the best mineral. Vibranium is the best thing in the Marvel universe, next to one of those Thanos gems.
And it's interesting that Jeff, in the article that again I posted on the chat, they talk about before the comic code went into effect in the 1950s, there were things like All Negro Comics, which would allow Black writers and Black artists to put out stuff. One of the things that was kind of a backhanded thing they did with the comics code was he said you could not insult minorities. And I think they took that as a thing like people didn't want to deal with minorities. And it wasn't until the Marvel age in the 60s that, people would even do anything serious with minorities again, unless if anybody has any information, you can correct me if I'm wrong. But I think that was the gist of Saladin's article, that there was a lot of cool stuff going on before the comics code. But then because of the congressional crackdown, comics kind of became very vanilla, for lack of a better word, and tried to be, we're all for America, we're all for the team, no horror, we respect authority. So it wasn't until Stan started to challenge that in the 60s and 70s that we got out of that.
But you did see what I would call forced in integration of some teams, especially during World War II. You could see, the token Black and the token Native American, and just to show that we were all Americans. We're going to go fight the Nazis and that sort of thing.
Well, I don't think that was. I don't think that was happening in the 40s. I don't think that was happening at the time. I could be wrong. I think that's more of a 60s thing, where you would do that. I mean, again, if somebody has information, correct me if I'm wrong, but I just feel that was kind of more of a 60s.
I
60s.
thought it was more of a 50s thing, but I could be wrong on that too.
Well, I don't know.
'cause-
When I reflect back on the World War II era comics like that I'm familiar with, like Justice Society of America and the Invaders and those groups, I don't. They seem pretty wide in my memory.
Well, and then the Invaders don't really exist. The
I don't
Invaders was
recall.
something that Roy Thomas came up with in the 70s. There was never the Marvel heroes of the 40s never assembled into a team. They were on covers.
Yeah. Okay,
But-
but if we take that group as the timely
That's the
World
one.
War
Okay, my
II
timetable may be off
hero,
then.
I don't.
Rich,
There
your
being
sound is
minority
breaking.
representation.
Richard, your sound is breaking up really bad. I don't know if you're too far away.
Yeah, so is yours.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll move closer and you can move closer and we'll all be
Okay,
good.
I'll move closer too.
Okay. Yeah, it's
Sorry
just
about
breaking
that,
up on me.
everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Is it any
and-
better now?
Yes, much better.
Okay.
Okay, so we're good on the sound. Yeah, good. That's always a problem. People leaning too far back and you can't pick it up. So anyway, we were talking about the history of, and you're saying that it really kind of broke. Juan, you were saying the ground really broke with the Marvel comics. What do you think was, I don't know that much of the history of Marvel comics, honestly, but what do you think was the first real breakout superhero of color? Was it Black Panther?
It is the Black Panther, and that's
Okay.
and the thing is, I think then you had the Black Panther, then you had Falcon. I mean, I don't think DC, I don't think Jon Stewart,
No, that was
or
much
any-
later.
or Black Lightning came out until the 70s. So I think Marvel was kind of, going ahead at that time. So, and DC was lagging behind. I mean, unfortunately, there was a bad mindset when Neil Adams, I think, proposed the idea of Jon Stewart. Julius Schwartz, who was a great editor, but unfortunately he was at that time a 40 or 50-year-old man, said, all right, we'll get a Green Lantern and we'll call him Lincoln Washington. And Neil Adams said, no, don't do that. You're not seeing what's going into the papers. They don't know. That is not a good name. And,
That's not what we're
and
doing,
then-
right?
yeah, no, and they created Jon Stewart as the new alternate Green Lantern.
Well, that was pretty late, though, wasn't it? That was in the
That was in the 70s.
70s, yeah. I do have a funny story about that, though. I was talking to one of, I work at a Publix, and I was talking to one of the kids being anybody under the age of 25, and he was a Black kid, and he was complaining about why are there no, this is about 10 years ago, so no Black Panther yet, complaining about why is there no Black superheroes. He goes, and why did they turn Jon Stewart white? Because, of course, all he knew of Green Lantern had been Jon Stewart. So why were they making him white in the movie? He had finally found a superhero, and then they screwed it up for him. So,
Well, yeah, when the Justice League came out in the mid-2000, 2000, Hal Jordan was dead at that point, and not to mention the writers of that show, and I think one of them was a very good writer by the name of Dwayne McCullough, wanted to have a more balanced team. And so that's why Jon Stewart became the Green Lantern rather than Kyle Rayner, who was the Green Lantern, the main Green Lantern in the comics at the time. So they wanted to have a
I
balance.
don't know if he was watching. Yeah, he probably would have been watching at that age. Yeah, I'm trying to remember. He was just out of
Justice
high
League.
school, so.
Justice League started in 2000, around that, because I remember I had a party with friends to catch the 90-minute premiere.
So other than Black Americans, what other minorities have you seen represented for good or for bad in comics? None? We haven't had any. Okay.
I mean, I like to say, we're a very, very diverse country, and we've seen how Captain America took on Hydra, and we all know Hydra is coded for the Nazis, and that wasn't even, a direct villain of America, but yet, we've had problems with Native Americans taking on any type of semblance of who their real enemy is in a comic book, I think that same thing carries over to all people of color. We have to look at these comic books didn't just start in an earlier time in America. It started in a time period where America was segregated. You know, when we look at a lot of the people who are in publishing in the 90s, in the early 2000s, we call them gatekeepers. A lot of times they're still carrying on visions of the readership that they wanted to have in the earlier days of the comic industry that wasn't integrated. You know, so when you were talking about dealing with people of color, Juan, I don't think they wanted the people who supported jazz music and blues music to read comics. This is the time period that, you know, the Isley Brothers were singing songs that white bands were covering for them. You know, so I just think they didn't want to read anything but what was of their own ethnicity, as opposed to embracing diversity. You know, I mean, we like to say it's racism. Sure, you could easily say it's racism, but in reality, it's also the lack of desire to read something of color.
So you thought that they
I
would
think that
actually
had a lot to do with it. I think that had a lot to do with why we didn't see diversity until we started embracing diversity more in our daily lives. Because, you know, All Negro Comics wasn't just a comic company because Black people created things. It was probably the same vein as Black colleges. Give them something for them to read, and we have something for us to read. And until society started getting integrated, then these comics started to become more integrated. But we're dealing with a society that didn't want to be around each other.
Yeah, good point. I hadn't thought of that.
Despite their full diversity. And this is before the South had migration to the North. So the South was much more diverse than it is now. You know, so just looking at it from that perspective, you know, you're trying to get people to read something even in today's world where they live and go to school with each other that's diverse, and they still giving you backlash, you know, as opposed to a time when you didn't have to go to school together, you didn't have to work together, you didn't have to live together, and now you want a team of diverse superheroes together? Nah, I don't think that's gonna happen.
Yeah, it's sort of like in the 30s where movies were segregated. I mean, you know, you had Black film companies, and then you had the big film companies, and they marketed to their neighborhoods. So other than Black Panther, what were the first breakout? You know, Black Panther, Black Lightning. Were there any others that stayed popular? I guess I should say.
Storm and the X-Men.
Storm, that's true.
Been a pretty strong, a pretty popular character.
How long has she been around?
I don't know. What's
mid-70s.
Claremont started writing it. When was that?
Mid-70s.
Well, no, she was in Giant Size X-Men, so she was mid-70s.
Okay, so all right, and I mean, and you know, Shang-Chi is getting a movie, so there's one Asian character who is potentially hitting the big time. I actually think that as far as just sheer representation in Marvel and DC, Black people haven't fared that well. Asian people and Latino people probably fared even worse in terms of characters that rise to any kind of prominence.
I was going to say, I was actually trying to think of a Latinx character that,
or a Native American character.
or well, I can only think of one.
Yeah, Tonto.
Which is was the one
No,
that you
but-
were.
DC or Marvel though?
Yeah, Chris Claremont wrote Dawnstar for the New Mutants.
And he also had a character with Brazilian roots in the New Mutants with Sunspot.
Yeah, right.
But,
And
yeah,
I
but
know
it's like those are really obscure characters. Maybe not deservedly so, but I mean they certainly don't have the visibility of a Black Panther. You know?
Well, the New Mutants was one of the big. I mean, because it had that mutant that X-Men shine. I think the New Mutants were at least very popular in the '80s.
Well, they are getting a movie, and I know that Dawn Star
Which
is in the
apparently been
movie. Everybody's
murdered
getting a
by
movie.
audiences and critics.
There's the only other Latin character, and who's actually maybe getting a renaissance is Vibe. Although he had a really tacky costume to begin with, and I think George Perez either killed him or tried to kill him in Crisis, but he's kind of been revived, and he's actually a major character on The Flash. So it's getting better. For me, it's very weird about growing up in Miami. Latin is kind of a weird thing because there were so many other Latin people. It's I explained that to a couple of fans at Worldcon, and they were also Latin, and they kind of got it. And also, it's kind of weird because the majority Latin is very conservative. The Cuban community is, and there's sometimes you don't see eye to eye on cultural and political issues. And as I said, growing up in South Florida, since you saw so many, it's like, and I'm probably an outlier. You're just looking for something kind of different and popular. So I'm one of the people who wasn't trying to find myself in the fiction I was looking for. I like it now. It's better now that you can do that. I think we're better off now than we were back in the 80s or 70s or what have you. I think we're going better going forward.
And that's what I say, Juan, when I say the need for writers and creators who are organically from those communities, because they can tell the difference between somebody from Colombia, Venezuela, Nicaragua, Panama, Cuba, Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, and they can, and Mexico, and they can write those things as opposed to somebody writing that here's this Puerto Rican eating a tortilla, or dancing, merengue, in San Juan, or in a part of Mexico, and they throw it all lumped together. You're looking at the same thing with Black Americans, African Americans, and then Africans in general. Many times
it's all one country.
Yeah, people just think of Africa as one country, and your East Africans look different, speak different, act different than your West Africans. And when you think about it, you say, yeah, you start giving them references. You say, hey, how about this actor? How about that actor? And then the same thing with Black Americans, African Americans. Your Northern African American is different than your Miami African American. Or a California African American with Snoop Dogg and the laid back LA vibe. That's a totally different vibe than a New York vibe,
Yeah, that was something that really got Stephen Barnes mad in the I forget which Avengers movie. It might have been, I don't know if it was Civil War, but they went to just Africa or West Africa. They didn't even mention a country where they had to do, I forget, it must have been Civil War where Tony had to buy a building, and it's just, they just could have not have thought of a country. They just had to say they're in West Africa, and it's like, where? It's like, and unfortunately, there are certain, I don't know if that goes up to Feige or the directors or the writers. They just, said, oh, it's all one thing, and it's, it's very nuanced.
It's kind of ironic in a way. Marvel was, as opposed to DC, was the company that said, in the United States, let's use real cities. Let's use Metropolis. Let's not use Metropolis. Let's use New York. But when you get out of the United States, they really like their made-up countries.
Yeah, that's true. I thought about that. Right. Now,
well, I don't want to go. Well, I might want to go to Wakanda, but I don't know if I'd want to go to Latveria. I don't know if that's a fun place to go to.
Well, I know with the only Native American that I know is Dawn Star, and to be honest, I only read like the first 10 issues.
Let's not forget Apache Chief.
He was
why? was it really Apache Chief? Okay.
Yeah, the Super Friends.
Well, he was on Hanna-Barbera.
Hanna-Barbera is a totally different thing.
We criticize, we do criticize, unfortunately, how goofy, because unfortunately the writers of Hanna-Barbera, for the most part, kind of wrote down, even of a level lower. And also, I think they were also limited to how much violence you could do. I don't think you could actually punch another person in those days of animation. So they were kind of limited. But at the same time, the fact that, I don't know if it was encouraged by the FCC, but the fact that they did try to put in some ethnically diverse and racially diverse superheroes was commended. The only reason they didn't put Black Lightning on the Super Friends cartoon was they'd have to pay Tony Isabella. I guess his contract said that he'd get money if it was, and so that's why Black Vulcan came out. And actually, it's kind of funny. Tony Isabella's unfortunately, Black Lightning got canceled in the last issue. He wrote a thing where there was somebody imitating Black Lightning and doing bad things, and it was his knock that Hanna-Barbera was using this Black Lightning knockoff in their cartoon show.
One of the things that I thought of just listening to what you were saying, Juan, is, the progress around including Black characters in the comic books. And I think of this argument and this Twitter response. I think, how we live in this, get your culture, right? Somebody was talking about Jim Butcher, and Jim Butcher said he writes white characters because that's what he sees when he lives in Chicago, and
where's he living in Chicago?
that's a good question. And then the same argument was used for like Friends in New York. And somebody responded by saying, then your vision of Chicago and New York is flawed because you don't see the diversity that's there. You're living in a make-believe world. So I don't think it's only the superheroes that need to be diverse. I think it's the worlds that need to be, diverse. Everybody from James Jonah Jameson that runs Peter Parker's newspaper, all of those things need to become as diverse as the world that we live in. We shouldn't have to lobby and say, well, now we have a Black president. Now you can have one in comic books. Heck, we had Black people running for office long before Barack Obama, at least 20 years, for that to happen. And we play out all of these other type of characters that win office and become president, but we can't embrace a diverse president or a female president, but you can embrace an evil president before you can embrace a friendly Black person, male or female, and in your comic books, or you have to be pressured to do that. And then the other thing I say is I think that the world of comic books has shown that it's bigger than Marvel and DC. When Diamond Distribution shut down, independent comics had to step up. Walking Dead is is still the #1 comic book out there, and that's with IDW, I believe it is. And independent comics have been contributing and forcing the two top to become more diverse. And that is part of the conversation. Just like all Negro comics did in probably influencing Black Panther and other characters, independent comics and these independent comic conventions have been forcing the world that we see to become more diverse because they've proven that there is a market for it and that it'll work. I don't know if you've ever heard of the comic book Brother Man. Have you heard of Brother Man?
I've heard of it, but only in references to
In 1990 or 89, made $1 million at a Black Expo. That showed that there was room, and that was in 89, 90 when Black Expos were a big thing going around, showed that there was a market, there was a readership for it. But, we're still, struggling to get an introduced character. I mean, Milestone came out with Static Shock and Icon and the other characters in the early 90s as well. But there's still a bunch of other comic book companies and characters that are created that are selling that are still not embraced and not a part of conversations.
Okay, I'm going to open up
I just wanted to say that you know, like I said, I don't mean to minimize the, you know, the importance of independent comics. It's just that Marvel and DC are the ones that I read, because for me, reading comics is kind of partly an exercise of nostalgia.
Have
And
you
I
watched,
also
watched
wanted
The
to say
Boys?
that if I was going to go for like more representation of African American characters in comics, J. Jonah Jameson might not be the character I would start with wanting to switch over.
Well, they kind of did, because his number 2 man is Joe Robertson, who was a very popular character in the Spider-Man. You know, he was kind of the kind figure who kind of ran interference between Jonah and Peter, and also he was kind of always Jonah's conscience. You know, in
I'm
comics.
just saying Jonah is
You're breaking up
possibly
again,
not,
Richard.
you know, a great role model kind of character.
Yeah,
title.
he's not the nicest guy in the field here, you know. I mean, I wouldn't certainly I wouldn't want to be represented by that guy.
And so now you're writing him, because actually in the Daredevil comics, he's always backing up Ben Urich and trying to take down the Kingpin. So he's a very complex, and supposedly in his Marvel Universe entry, he's against anti-mutant prejudice. So
Oh, so they're trying to make him
Okay.
more of a good guy. Okay.
Oh, I'm not giving him enough credit. All right.
Okay,
I'm mainly associated with trying to take down Spider-Man.
yeah, well,
have
then to
to
be his
say.
main preoccupation in life, then it? Okay, does anybody have any questions? We've got about 10 minutes left here.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, I know. And if you just want to raise your hand, and hopefully I'll see you if you raise your hand up.
Yeah.
And there's, okay, Gary, go ahead.
Yeah, I've been listening, and I want to point out that, as Jeff said about an Italian American writing about Italy, a good researcher is able to do certain things. I mean, in one of the short stories I wrote about Boston, and people convey that you know, hey, I really like the feel of Boston. I've never been to Boston. The other thing I want to point out is, how many of us remember the Shaft movie series, the original Shaft with Richard Roundtree? The book, the novel, came from Ernest Tideman, who was a screenwriter, white person. And then when they did the movies, they had Gordon Parks as director, and they had a lot of different people like Isaac Hayes. They were going to use Isaac Hayes on the second film, Shaft's Big Score, but because of his political views, the white executives of the corporation that filmed it said no, so they let Gordon Parks do the soundtrack and the directing. So then there's been novels and written by many authors, plus there's been a comic book series, I think, of the Shaft series. So you have to look at some of the other things, but like Jeff says, a lot of it is society just hasn't been geared towards Black anything until the 60s. And we're slowly making progress, but look at some of the progress we've made. And then, as you point out, you think of ethnic groups. What about Jewish people who are superheroes? What about Arabic superheroes and whatever else? I mean, I can't think of any.
Well, actually, I can think of a few. Marvel was actually a pioneer of that. They, in some of their comics, like in the Hulk, you introduced an Arab superhero called the Arabian Night. And in an issue before or after that, they introduced an Israeli superhero called Sabra, and Kitty Pryde was also Jewish. And also, I don't know if it was obvious in the 60s, but the Thing was also Jewish. In fact,
Really?
Jack Kirby would draw Hanukkah cards with the Thing wearing a shawl and a yarmulke. And that's been a more modern thing to make a point that Ben Grimm is Jewish.
Can I also challenge Richard and say, have you heard of The Incredibles? Have you heard of The Boys? Have you heard of Watchmen? When we talk about superhero, the conversation around superhero, Incredibles offered a different conversation about the realism of superheroes. I know it was a silly children's cartoon, but it offered a different way to look at it. Now we're seeing The Boys, the Amazon Prime show, which of course started as an independent comic book, but it is really challenging superheroes, the Superman narrative, almost to the level of what Brightburn is brought. I think Brightburn came out last year. And then we seen what Watchmen did, but I think Watchmen is a mainstream comic, or it was released under Vertigo, which is a subsidiary of DC, but it probably
That was the boys.
the boys, I think it's ID is Image, might be
Is
Image.
it? Okay.
Let me
Either
Google.
Image or IDW.
Anyway,
But it's
respond-
independent.
responding to what you said, yeah, I'm a big fan of all three of those things.
But
and,
then-
I
and
was
nitpicky.
talking about the comic books that I read.
Oh, okay.
Not
And a
specifically-
nitpicky
not-
and a
not
nitpicky thing
TV
is
and movie derived from comic books, but with the comic books that I actually read. But
Ah.
all three of those things that you just mentioned, I really like.
Okay, Michael, I think Michael's got a question for us over here.
No, I just, can you unmute me?
Yeah, I did.
Thank you.
We hear you.
No, superheroes, I understand the comic aspect and I love all of them, DC Comics, everything. You know, but what about the superheroes in the film industry? I mean, we know Spider-Man and Batman and, you know, the Batman series got really awesome the last few years. But what about superheroes like Morgan Freeman, the actor? You know, in multiple movies. And Will Smith, Independence Day, come on. You know, I think he's a superhero. And then in the comedy, Eddie Murphy, he's been a superhero too.
So you're expanding the definition of superhero to include
Yes.
super people, regular superheroes.
I'll respond to that one. I'll respond to that, Michael. And I think what you're trying to say is probably superhero, the impact of film superheroes on the conversation around superheroes. And I'll do you one better. I like the characters the actors that you mentioned, but I'll go Robert Townsend and Meteor Man, right?
Okay.
And that actually went backwards. That started in film and then went backwards to comic book. And I know what you're saying with Will Smith and Hancock, and then just their behavior, because we got to accept that superheroes are not all mutants or all have superpowers. So sometimes we'll see these actors doing things super-ish. John Wick is a superhero. He's as much the Punisher as the Punisher is.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I think. Okay.
Hancock and Meteor Man are both good movies. I recommend.
I loved Hancock. Yep.
And so is Blank Man.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
haven't seen that
for
one.
sure.
Well, how many here remember the movie Mystery Men?
Ooh, got
Yeah.
one.
Oh no, that's a good one too. That was what, 20 years ago, I guess.
No, I'm pretty sure that was 2002 because I think that's when I got it. I moved into my house. I could be wrong about that.
Well, and I hate to tell
wait
you
a
that,
minute,
but
no.
it's almost 20 years ago.
Whoa!
No, you're right because I remember.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't. It's when I moved to Orlando.
Yeah.
I saw Mystery Men. I was still new to Orlando when that movie came out.
And that is
And that was
one
98.
that does have a Native American actor and character, but they don't make a really big deal of it because to those in that movie, it's just another guy. And that's Wes Stubbe played their mentor. And so I thought that was, well, first of all, I thought it was really well done. It's a great movie. And the fact that everybody just comes together and goes, oh yeah, okay, whatever, you're a guy, you know. They didn't make a big deal out of anybody's minority status or, you know, oh, you're a girl. Okay, fine, whatever, do your thing, you know. It's a really good comedy too. So anybody else have any questions? We've got about a minute left here. Let me slip over to the other side. No? Well, I would start with one more question, but this might get a little too complicated for right now. So instead of yeah, I don't want to do that. So why don't you guys just real quickly, Richard and Jeff, tell us what you got. Do you have anything coming out that we need to look for?
Well,
Jeff?
I do.
Okay,
it's
Richard.
actually a comic book related project. I guess I mentioned at the start of the panel on October 6th, you can pick up my novel, Marvel Legends of Asgard, The Head of Mimir.
Okay. Jeff,
Right.
you got anything?
And one of my favorite superheroes is, I think he's now with Marvel, but he started independent, and that was Conan the Barbarian. And I decided to come up with my own diverse Conan the Barbarian. I did a Kickstarter back in July, and it just fulfilled 2 weeks ago. There you can see it, Planet of Kiberlon. All right, I'm putting it back. It's a beautiful gladiator, a strongman, muscle man character. So if you're interested, I'm doing cash out $10 and I get you the book out, signed and everything. And then my next superhero is Fingernails. She's a 16-year-old gargoyle who has a paranormal investigation agency a la Scooby-Doo. And it's a nice little, what do you call it, diverse story. She has 2 Latino friends. One is Dominican, one is Puerto Rican. She's out of New York, and I'm having fun writing it. So that Kickstarter is, and actually, and one of the illustrators is from Dominican Republic. So not only is it a diverse character, but my wife is Dominican, so it was real easy for me, and the characters are diverse. So it's the creative team, and so are the characters. And that comes out probably in a week or 2. I'll be starting the Kickstarter.
Okay. Well, thank you guys very much. We're going to call it an afternoon here.